G'day everyone, Blake here with another video, and for years and years now I've been breeding bettas and I find it to be a really fun experience. You get all sorts of different colours and fin shapes and lengths and all sorts of different variety in the fry, which is always fun to see. So today I thought I'd show you how I breed bettas. There's many different ways, and I'm not saying that this way is the best way. It's just the way that works for me, so hopefully it helps you. And with that said, let's jump straight into the video. Okay, so first of all, we're going to need a few things. It's not too much. Most of us should have a lot of these items laying around home as it is. So we'll get started. We need a small fish tank. I like to use a minimum of 20 litres. So this Kmart starter tank here behind me is perfect for that. So as that, we also need a dechlorinator, obviously to put some water in the aquarium. So I've got just some Seachem Safe. Any sulfur-based dechlorinator will work well though. I'd like to put a little sponge filter just in the corner to give the female somewhere to hide whilst the breeding is taking place. Or it also helps to sort of get that cycling started so that the fry can be raised up in the same tank if you choose to do that. To aid that process, I do also like to put in a little bit of Reef Revolution BioBlast, which is a refrigerated bacteria supplement. So I like to just put a few drops of that in to get the sponge filter kick started, and I find that it helps to reduce the ammonia that is created whilst the breeding is going on, because the thing is we're not going to have any filtration during the breeding process. We need to have an area to separate the male and the female, and for that I use a net breeder box. I also just zip tie a couple of pieces of styrofoam to the top just to allow the breeder box to float so that I'm not constrained by the reliability of the suction cups or any sort of height of water level. So I find that to be really helpful. So we're going to need a surface for the male to create the bubble nest, and for that I'm lucky enough that I have an oak tree in my front yard, so I use oak leaves, but more commonly it's Indian almond leaves that are used for this purpose. I like to also just put a piece of bubble wrap underneath the leaves just so that we're not sort of rushing to get that bubble nest in place before the leaves become waterlogged and sink. And last but not least, we're just going to need a small aquarium heater. I like to set it at 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So now that we've got all of our ingredients together, it's time to set this up and get this process started. So I just start with filling up the aquarium about halfway with some dechlorinated tap water. I put the sponge filter in the back corner and put a little bit of the BioBlast in, ready to get that sponge sort of seated. Then I place the net breeder box off to the side, and that's where we're going to place the female, allowing the male to roam the rest of the tank and blow the bubble nest underneath the bubble wrap. Definitely get a tank with a tight fitting lid like this one has here, because betta fish are of course jumpers, so you want to make sure that they're not going to jump out of your aquarium even when it is partially filled. Another thing is you're not going to want to put any gravel or substrate in, because what's going to happen is when you are eventually successful in breeding these, the male, or in some cases the female, are going to catch the eggs as they fall out of the bubble nest. So if you have substrate, it's going to be really hard for the parents to find the eggs in amongst the sand, gravel, or anything else you choose to put on the bottom of the aquarium. So for that reason, you'll have a lot more success with hatching the eggs out if you have no substrate at all. Last but not least, I do have the sponge filter in there, but I wouldn't recommend having any filtration on, because any sort of surface agitation or movement is going to really mess with the bubble nest to make it difficult for the male to produce a nice big one. I know it kind of goes against everything we learn as fish keepers, but bettas are really minimal producers. We're not going to be overfeeding them while they're in this condition, so they can easily go 2, 3, 4, 5. I've even had them in there up to 7 days before without any issue. Just monitor the water. If you start to notice any weird smells or cloudiness, that's when it's time to do a big water change, or even take the fish out and start again. Now before you choose fish for a breeding project like this, you are going to want to condition them up really well. So I like to feed plenty of live blackworms, frozen bloodworms, or at the very least freeze-dried worms such as tubifex worms, blackworms, or bloodworms, to get them nice and fat and happy, full of eggs, or ready and rearing to go in the case of the males. So once you condition them up really well with some nice foods for a good week or so, you should see your fish start to look like this. So this here is the female I've selected. Now as you can see, she's pretty nice and plump. We've got a nice full belly there, and that's actually full of eggs because she's been in a tank with some males during this time. So it's going to be hard to see, but female bettas present an egg spot. So underneath, right at basically where she's the most fat, there's a little white dot that kind of looks like an egg hanging out. And that's how you can tell the difference between female bettas and male bettas, is that egg spot. Now that's the best and most accurate way to tell. Some other ways are that they won't have as colorful scales or fins, and the fins aren't going to be as long, and they're going to start further back in the body. But for us, we can see a nice protruded egg spot there, so we can be sure that this girl here is a female. As well as that, this girl here is from a batch of koi bettas, and you can see that she doesn't look much like a koi betta. Well, I've actually found with my breeding of koi bettas in the past, they take quite a while to get their coloration. Some of the more dominant males get splotches of reds and blacks immediately, but especially the females stay white for a really long time. So I found that interesting whilst I've been breeding these guys here. But this female here looks nice and ready to go. She's certainly fat and happy. So I'm going to float this container in the aquarium now and get her released into the net breeder box. Now, when choosing a male, you want a nice kind of strong hump just behind the head, thick body, and as much color as you can get really. So I've chosen this guy here, who is, yeah, as I mentioned, a sibling of the female, but that's not a big deal for the first few generations. You wouldn't want to keep doing that over and over again, but you can see this is a nice, yeah, pretty looking guy, and I just thought he showed the best attributes in terms of fins, stockiness, and color out of the batch. 24 hours later now, and I just put a light on the aquarium just to help with filming and glare and all that sort of thing. But you can see now the tannins have really set in from those leaves. So what you're going to look for now is the female is going to be nice and plump, and eventually on the sides you should start to see some stripes. And this is a lot easier on darker bettas because the stripes are usually a sort of beige color, but on this white one it's probably not going to be too visible at all. But you'll see definitely the stomach will plump up full of eggs, and you'll start to notice that egg spot become more prominent. In terms of the male, you should start to notice some behavior where they are actively sucking oxygen from the surface and then blowing it underneath the surface of the leaf, forming a bubble nest like this one has here overnight. So generally what you're going to look for is real defensive territorial behavior around that bubble nest. You can see this male here, he doesn't want me filming at all, he's very protective over it. That's the point where you can get your net and let her out into the same aquarium. Don't be alarmed if immediately you start to see them chasing each other. It's gonna happen every time. Just keep an eye on it, let them in there for about 10-15 minutes, and you might start to see that after some initial chasing, the male will actually lead the female up to the bubble nest. So you'll see immediately you put the female in, they'll chase each other around, and then the male will eventually come to a conclusion that, oh, this is actually, you know, a potential mate here, and he'll start going over to her and then sort of doubling back to the bubble nest to guide her over there. You can put the female in with the male for about 24 hours at a time, but if they haven't mated during that 24-hour period, they're probably not going to in this instance. So then I like to actually catch her out again and separate, because as they say, absence makes the heart grow fonder, and if you just leave them in forever, they'll get a bit complacent and not do the deed. So after crossing your fingers, this is exactly what we want to happen. This is what betta breeders call the embrace, and the first few times don't be alarmed if they don't quite get it right. You can see here the male is trying to do it but not really crossing over properly. It's kind of awkward and stumbly, and that's okay. It might take him 10, 15, 20 minutes to get it right, but eventually when they stick at it, they'll embrace properly, and what you'll start to see is some eggs falling after the embrace has taken place. So this breeding process can take an entire day, basically 12 hours, 20 hours. It can take as long as it takes for all the eggs to be fertilized and come out of the female. So you can see now they're just dropping after that embrace. The male will go ahead and collect them all up in his mouth, and then he'll take them up to the bubble nest and insert each egg in an individual bubble so that yeah, they can incubate properly. It's a really fascinating thing to watch, and definitely you want to help this process. So Shortly after the breeding process took place, I did move the sponge filter and anything from underneath the bubble nest very carefully out of the way. And yeah, you just really want to help out where you can, because it's a tireless few days after the breeding has taken place. The male is constantly having to catch these eggs as the bubbles pop and they fall. But yeah, the embrace is definitely a fun and interesting process to watch when breeding bettas, if you can catch it. Don't be alarmed if the female is a bit motionless and kind of just floating around. She's obviously very tired from this process, so she takes a little while to recover once the last few eggs have been released. It's a process that can take a while. I've seen it take 12 hours, 15 hours, and even longer sometimes. So it's a whole day affair, but yeah, really interesting to watch. You might even find yourself lucky and you might have a proactive female as well. Sometimes the females do help to maintain the bubble nest, build the bubble nest, and catch the eggs and place them in the bubble nest as well. So that's really handy to see, and it helps the male out quite a lot. In that case, I would leave the female in with the male so they can both share the duties, but more often than not, it's mainly the male that does all the work after the eggs have been released. So the female, obviously tired through the process, you can take her out and she's no longer required once the eggs are released. In actually some cases, you can find that the female can be a bit of a predation risk and sometimes can eat some of the eggs and all that sort of stuff when they fall. So it is best to just leave the male to it. Another thing to consider is that the male is going to have to keep a close eye on this bubble nest, make sure that any eggs that do fall are caught and placed back up in the nest. So you're going to have to leave at least some sort of light on the entire time for the hatching process, which can take about 24 hours to first hatch and then 3 or 4 days to start to get some movement from the fry. It's really interesting to see as well. Initially the fry will sort of bob up and down within the bubble nest, and then eventually they'll be free swimming. You can remove the male from that point as well. Some good first foods to feed are vinegar eels, because they do float to the top of the water column, which is where the fry are going to be. Other than that, you can progress onto microworms, powdered foods, crushed up flakes, and baby brine shrimp as well. The newborn fry will be really hard to notice at first. You'll just kind of see some tiny tails and bodies hanging out of the bubble nest, and then it won't take too long at all till you'll see them sticking on the glass and yeah, just attaching themselves to various surfaces. As they just grow and develop further, they get stronger and become free swimming. So there you go, guys. That is my how to breed betta step-by-step guide. Hopefully this video helps you. Certainly a fun process, and it's a good one to involve kids in, or your significant other. Get them into fish perhaps. If this video helps you, it always helps me to smash like, hit subscribe and all that fun stuff. If you got any further queries or comments you're trying to troubleshoot, feel free to drop them down below and I'll try and help you out as best I can. Other than that, hopefully I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.